A pope who bribed his way to power, had sex with his own daughter, and eliminated cardinals with a signature poison so effective it became Europe's most feared weapon. In the holiest city on earth, the pontiff himself hosted naked prostitutes who performed acts so depraved that chroniclers feared divine retribution for merely recording them. Welcome to Rome, 1492, where the new pope's election wasn't guided by the Holy Spirit, but by mules loaded with silver and promises of carnal pleasures. The Borgias didn't just commit crimes, they transformed the Vatican into history's most depraved crime family. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, didn't just break his vows of celibacy, he flaunted his mistresses and illegitimate children in the sacred halls where he was supposed to represent God on earth. I'm Chris, and this is Crimes of the Crown. Today we're exposing the savage truth of the Borgia papacy, a reign so corrupt that bodies were fished from the Tiber River almost nightly, where the Pope's son Cesare murdered his own brother out of jealousy, and where beautiful Lucrezia supposedly wore a hollow ring filled with poison to eliminate anyone who crossed her family at dinner parties. Did the Borgias really hold incestuous orgies in the Vatican garden? Was the Pope's daughter actually her own child's mother and sister? And did the family perfect an undetectable poison that left no trace but guaranteed an excruciating death? The evidence will shock you even 500 years later. To understand the Borgias, we need to understand Renaissance Italy, a patchwork of competing city-states, duchies, and kingdoms where power was a deadly game played with diplomacy, marriage, and murder. The papacy wasn't just a religious position, it was one of Europe's most powerful thrones, controlling vast territories, enormous wealth, and the ability to crown or excommunicate kings themselves. Enter Rodrigo Borgia. Born in 1431 in Spain, his uncle was Pope Calixtus III, and nepotism, it turns out, runs deep in that family. At just 25, Rodrigo was made a cardinal by his uncle. Let that sink in. A 20-something given one of the church's highest offices. Not because of piety or scholarship or general good character, mind you, but just simply because of his last name. Over the next few decades, Rodrigo accumulated wealth, power, and despite his vows of celibacy, a rather impressive collection of mistresses and children. By 1492, he was one of the richest and most influential cardinals of all of Rome, with one not so small problem. He wanted to be pope. When Pope Innocent VIII died in July of 1492, the College of Cardinals gathered to elect his new successor. What followed was less a divine selection and more of an auction. Rodrigo Borgia didn't just outbid his rivals, he demolished them, offering cardinals titles, palaces, castles, and sacks of silver in exchange for their votes. One contemporary chronicler wrote that Borgia bought the papal tiara with 4 mule loads of silver. Another cardinal, upon hearing of Borgia's election, reportedly cried out, "Now we are in the power of a wolf, and if we do not flee, he will devour us." On August 11, 1492, Rodrigo Borgia was crowned Pope Alexander VI. The wolf was now the shepherd, and Rome was about to experience one of the most scandalous papacies in its 2,000-year history. If Alexander VI hadn't simply been a corrupt pope, he might be a footnote in history. But what makes the Borgia story truly exceptional is that this was a whole entire family affair. Despite his vow of celibacy, Alexander had at least 7 children with multiple different mistresses, but 2 stand out in particular, Cesare and Lucrezia. Cesare Borgia, handsome, brilliant, and utterly ruthless, made a cardinal at just 18 years old, beat his father by 7 whole years, despite having zero religious vocation whatsoever. He would later resign his cardinalate to become a military commander, inspiring Machiavelli's The Prince, actually, with his cunning and cruelty. Cesare's personal motto? Either Cesare or nothing. Subtle? He was not. And then there's Lucrezia. Married off at just 13 to forge a political alliance, she would go through 3 husbands in her lifetime. The first marriage was annulled on dubious grounds. The second husband mysteriously was murdered. History has painted her as a poisoner and a seductress, though modern historians debate whether she was more a perpetrator or more of a pawn in her father and brother's schemes. With Pope Alexander VI on the papal throne, the corruption was jaw-dropping even by Renaissance standards. The Pope created cardinals in exchange for massive payments, the equivalent of millions and millions in today's money. Vatican offices were sold to the highest bidder. Even indulgences, pardons for sins were up for sale, effectively turning salvation itself into a commodity. The Pope needed money, lots of it, to fund his lavish lifestyle and his family's ambitions. Contemporary accounts describe the Vatican under Alexander VI as a non-stop party of gambling, dancing, and much, much, much worse. The Pope's appetites for power, wealth, and pleasure were absolutely limitless. But perhaps most shocking to all of his contemporaries was how openly Alexander flaunted his corruption. While previous popes had had children and mistresses, they had at least maintained plausible deniability. Alexander, by contrast, brought his children to live in the Vatican and openly bestowed titles, lands, and wealth upon them. If corruption was the Borgia foundation, poison was their absolute signature. The family became so associated with poisoning that the term Borgia cup entered the lexicon, a drinking vessel supposedly designed to detect poison. The Borgia's alleged poison of choice? Cantarella, a mysterious concoction said to be tasteless and absolutely odorless, causing victims to waste away slowly over days or several weeks. Its exact composition remains unknown, though modern speculation suggests it may have contained arsenic and perhaps some plant toxins. The death toll was suspicious, to say the least. Cardinals who opposed Alexander's policies had an unfortunate habit of dying suddenly. Wealthy nobles would perish, their lands conveniently absorbed by the papal states or given to Borgia allies. The Pope's second son, Juan, was murdered in 1497, not by poison, but stabbed and thrown into the Tiber River. Some historians suspect Cesare, jealous of his brother's position, but the crime remains unsolved. And now we come to the most notorious of the allegations against the Borgias, the whispers of incest between father and daughter, brother and sister, and of orgies held within the sacred walls of the Vatican itself. The Venetian ambassador wrote that every night 4 or 5 men are murdered near the Vatican, generally for the sake of their money or goods, and all of the courtesans of Rome, it is said, are under the protection of the Pope's son. Johann Burchard, the papal master of the ceremonies who kept meticulous diaries, described the infamous Banquet of Chestnuts on October 1501, a feast in the Vatican where 50 honest courtesans, which is just a polite term for high-class prostitutes, allegedly danced naked after dinner and, well, let's just say chestnuts were the tamest items on the menu that night. But here's where history gets tricky. Many of these accounts come from political enemies of the Borgias. Renaissance Italy was a hotbed of propaganda and character assassination. Modern historians debate which allegations are true, which are exaggerated, and which are completely fabricated. The incest allegations in particular remain hotly contested. Did Alexander VI and Cesare really have a sexual relationship with Lucrezia? Some historians point to the unusual closeness of the family, to Lucrezia's presence at the Vatican functions normally closed to women, and to the peculiar timing of her pregnancies. Others argue that claims were pure slander from rival families like the Sforzas. By 1500, the Borgia family had reached the height of their power. Pope Alexander VI had divided Italy with France. Cesare Borgia had conquered the Romagna region through brilliant military campaigns and breathtaking treachery, earning him the nickname Il Valentino, the valiant one, and Lucrezia was positioned as a ruler of Ferrara through her third marriage. Cesare's methods were particularly brutal. In one infamous episode at Sinigaglia in 1502, he invited 4 rival condottieri, mercenary leaders, to a reconciliation dinner only to have them strangled as soon as they arrived. Machiavelli, who witnessed Cesare's rise firsthand, was impressed by the efficiency if not the ethics, writing that Cesare knew how to win men and bind them to himself. For a brief, glittering moment, it seemed that the Borgias might establish a hereditary dynasty to rival any royal house in Europe. Alexander VI spoke openly of crowning Cesare as king of Italy. The Pope himself, in his 70s now, showed no signs of slowing down at all. But then, a twist of fate that even the Borgias couldn't scheme their way out of. In August 1503, both Pope Alexander VI and Cesare Borgia fell desperately ill after dining at a cardinal's villa. Malaria was rampant in Rome during the summer, but naturally rumors of poison spread immediately. Had the master poisoners finally been beaten at their very own game? On August 18th, 1503, Alexander VI died. Contemporary accounts describe his body as swollen and black, consistent with the effects of either severe malaria or certain poisons. Cesare, younger and stronger, survived, but was bedridden during the crucial papal conclave that followed. Without Alexander's protection, the Borgia Empire collapsed with stunning speed. Cesare's enemies united against him, his territories were stripped away, and he was eventually imprisoned in Spain. In 1507, at just 31, he died fighting as a mercenary in an obscure Spanish conflict, an inglorious end for a man who once aspired to rule all of Italy. Only Lucrezia survived to maintain some vestige of the family's power and wealth, living until 1519 as the respected Duchess of Ferrara, reinventing herself as a patron of the arts and model of Renaissance virtue itself. It was perhaps the most impressive Borgia transformation of all. The Borgia papacy just lasted 11 years, but its impact on history was profound. The corruption and scandals of Alexander VI's reign directly contributed to the Protestant Reformation, which began just 14 years after his death. Martin Luther specifically cited the corruption of the Borgia Pope in his critiques of the Catholic Church. Ironically, the Borgia excess also helped usher in reforms within the Catholic Church itself. Later, Renaissance popes, aware of the damage done to the Church's reputation, worked to restore its moral authority. And of course, the Borgias achieved a kind of immortality through their infamy. 5 centuries later, they remain synonymous with corruption, poison, and intrigue, inspiring countless books, films, and TV series. Were the Borgias really as evil as history paints them? Probably not. Renaissance politics was brutal, and many of their contemporaries were equally ambitious and ruthless, just much less successful. Were they saints tragically maligned by history? Most definitely not. The evidence of corruption and murder is simply too substantial. Perhaps the most honest assessment comes from Machiavelli himself, who saw in Cesare Borgia a man who would have succeeded in anything he undertook, if not for extraordinarily bad luck. The Borgias sought to build an empire through any means necessary, and for a brief, blazing moment, they nearly succeeded. What do you think? Were the Borgias master criminals or misunderstood political geniuses? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this dark journey through Renaissance history, hit that like button and subscribe for more royal crimes and scandals. Next week, we'll explore a few drops of poison transformed the Russian court under Ivan the Terrible. This is Crimes of the Crown, where history's most powerful families get away with murder until they don't. Thanks for watching.